Good evening, everybody. Clerk Reed, if you'd like to take the roll, please.
Alderman Braithwaite. Alderman Nguyen. Alderman Wilson. Alderman Ruth Simmons.
Here.
Alderman Suffredin.
Here.
Alderman Ravel. Here. Alderman Rainey. Alderman Fleming.
Here.
All right, looks like we have everybody, and I know Alderman Rainey is on her way. So first order of business is, announcements from me. I'll just say that today's a tough day, right? It's a tough day for everybody here in this room. It's a tough day for everybody watching. It's a tough day for everybody across America, right? We all woke up this morning to some really tragic news. You know, another shooting rampage, this one in Las Vegas. This one of the deadliest in American history, with, I think, the latest death toll at 58 and rising. My heart aches for the victims and the families and the friends and loved ones that must endure this horrific pain. My heart aches for our country, one where we've become so divided that we can't seem to come together to address problems that are right in front of us. My heart aches for all the children who are scared and afraid by the world we live in. I appreciate what a lot of educators have done today and the messages that they've sent out to children in this community and other communities. We are the adults. We must do something. Tonight, I'm asking that we have a moment of silence to reflect on those who lost their lives last night and all their family and friends who are enduring unspeakable pain. Tomorrow, I'm asking that you ask yourself, what can I do from where I stand to create a community and a country that is more loving, less divided, and safer for our citizens and our children? Please join me in a moment of silence or a prayer if you'd like. And let's stand up for that, please. Thank you. I'm going to let that be my only public announcement today. And we have Mr. Lyon sitting in for Mr. Bobkowitz. Do you have any city manager announcements?
No, Mr. Mayor, I have no announcements.
Okay. City clerk, do you have any announcements?
I have no announcements.
Okay, great. Okay, city clerk's going to go and grab the sign-in sheet, and we'll quickly. I don't know how many commenters we have, but we have public comment, as we always do. I will remind people that we set aside 45 minutes per our rules for public comment. If we have less than 15 people that have signed up for public comment, then I'll ask that each person keep your remarks to 3 minutes or less. I would ask, as always, that we be respectful to the other folks that are in the audience, as well as the people up at the dais with your time. I will give you a indication if you're at 10 to 15 seconds before you're at the 3-minute mark. Okay, so today it looks like we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We have 9 people that have signed up, so each person will get up to the 3 minutes if you need it. Just in terms of the timeline for tonight, as I know people are here for different things, this is a special meeting of the city council, and we are going to be talking about the downtown development plan, or the downtown plan that was put together in 2009. And as soon as we get through public comment, we'll get into that, and then we have an executive session, the city council does, that shouldn't be too long, that we will go into. I'm going to guess a half an hour, and then the Human Services Committee will convene. Okay, so that's sort of the agenda for the night. So let's begin with the public comment. The first one we have is Austin Shearer. And again, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing names or can't read some of this writing.
Pronunciation is fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Austin Shearer. I'm an Evanston resident. My grandfather and son went to Northwestern. Evanston, in my opinion, is unique in that it honors historic architecture and it provides green open space to its residents. The library parking lot building, I think, violates both of these very proud traditions. The difficulty with the building, it's just too large a building for too tight a space, and it's going to put a wedge between the two historic buildings, the Colonial Women's Club building and the Gothic Francis Willard building. The Francis Willard building, in fact, will be in the shadow of that building almost the entire winter, most of the fall, most of the spring, and every time except for really high summer. I think it's the wrong building at the wrong time, and I would urge you to consider other alternatives. It could be made into a park temporarily. All you need to do is put some grass and benches in. It's right next to the library. I think this building is going to degrade the library because mothers and young children are not going to want to go into a parking garage, an internal garage, to get into the library. So I don't think the library will get as much use. So you're weakening the library. You're making the two small buildings look kind of ridiculous because next to an 11-story building, they'll just look like little token buildings. And I'm really against that. The other real problem I see with this building is liability. The Chicago Avenue has been narrowed considerably with the bike lane, which I think is a terrific thing for the Northwestern students. The west side of Chicago Avenue is the main corridor from the Village to Northwestern campus, and it's heavily trafficked. Now somehow 500 to 700 cars are going to have to get into that building, and they're either going to go in some downtown, in some lower ramp, or across the sidewalk, or even worse, in the back alleys, which is even more dangerous, and that's a real liability hazard. I would say, you better put the funds that you get for the parking lot away to pay for the liabilities, because the first bad accident that happens with a student in a car, the lawyer is going to say this was an inherently dangerous situation. It's the worst bottleneck in the city, and it is completely inconsistent to put a big building there when you've already narrowed the avenue. So I'm very much opposed to this.
I got to have you wrap up in 10 seconds.
I think it's the wrong building at the wrong time. My grandfather would have said, penny wise, pound foolish. Thank you.
Thank you, Austin. The next speaker is Jean Lindwall. Then we have Sarah Shostak, and then I think it's Howard Ellman.
Hi, I'm obviously Jean Lindwall. I just kind of wanted to give you some thoughts about the downtown plan as you begin the review process. I was staff when the 1989 downtown plan was written, which again it forms the basis for the zoning, the purpose statements for the downtown districts that are currently in place. As just a regular citizen, I was actively involved in the meetings that led to the development of the 2009 comprehensive or downtown plan and the development of the zoning, form-based zoning that wasn't adopted yet. But over the last week or so, I had the opportunity to talk to the principals of one of the major development projects that's happening, and I expressed my concern about the size and scale of some of the downtown developments that are coming along, which I'm sure you've heard lots of those comments from constituents all over the city. And one of the issues, I mean, obviously, if you're looking, developers want to make money, and so there are a number of components that go into their development projects. The cost of the land, obviously, but there are also other factors, and one of the biggest ones is Evanston's current requirement that any development over a certain size must be a planned development and must go through that planned development process, which really means that developers can't design a project that would fit within right and be developed without development without going through this formal process. And what that does is it really increases the costs for developers. And, since they have to go through the process anyway, it really means that there is no reason for them not to, and every reason for them to propose a development project that is larger than what they need to be financially successful. I mean, they do have added costs, so they have to increase the building size for that reason. But, as soon as, if you can't build, just, look into the zoning ordinance and design a project that fits within the zoning parameters of the district that you're in, then you have a whole lot of more, architectural costs, engineers, attorneys, the whole, that have to go through the process. So it increased costs, and it really, drives up the size of the proposed buildings. The other thing.
15 more seconds,
okay,
Jean.
the affordable housing ordinance falls into the same sort of thing, which also increases costs. So I hope you'll kind of think through those issues as you consider the downtown plan.
Thank you. All right, next up, we got Sarah Shostak, then Howard Ellman, and then Seth Weinberg.
Good evening. I've been reading the downtown plan from 2009, and I have a few more thoughts about that. My first thought is I cannot believe that last week, sitting here, the city manager said, oh, it's not codified, we don't need to pay attention to that downtown plan. This downtown plan has the wisdom of other councils and planners, people who participated, lots of people who participated in coming up with the findings. I found it also quite interesting that on page 70 of said plan, it says the allowance and exception process commonly used in approving plan development projects is not working. Such allowances and exceptions have lowered people's confidence in the planned development process. Residents of Evanston see downtown development review as an ad hoc, case-by-case assessment where decisions are made by City Council without sufficient consideration of the principles of comprehensive planning and the tenets of good urban form. And then there's another paragraph about public benefits that developers are offering. They're very vague and general, including such things as payment of taxes, the redevelopment of vacant land, and the creation of jobs. These benefits are not unique or specific to one project and do not relate to the immediate impacts on the neighborhood. There's a lot of wisdom there. It's such a shame that the cart this meeting tonight to think about the downtown plan was put before the horse, which was a vote to sell this land last week. That is what people on the street sometimes say is ass backwards. So, anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Howard Ellman, Seth Weinberg, and then Chuck Wasserberg.
Hi, thank you. I'm Howard Ellman. Listening to Sarah talk, it felt like a deja vu moment for me. I was a president of a condo association here in Evanston, and we got very involved opposing a development that was going in next door. And I studied the downtown plan, and Sarah's comments were our comments that we made to City Council, we made to plan development, we made, went through the whole process, and the building got built. And we were told again and again, look, it's a plan, it's guidance, but it's not zoning law. So speaking from that experience, I guess my input to the council is that unless the current plan is actually going to be codified and made into zoning law, speaking as a citizen who went through this process, it's way too detailed, it's way too specific, and it's way too confusing for someone who doesn't really understand the law and how the law works. You read it, and a reasonable person says, well, wait a second, it says it must be, any plan development has to follow the downtown plan. This doesn't follow the downtown plan. How can this be passed as a planned development? Some of you may remember me. You were on the council when I was up here complaining about that. So I guess my advice to you would be to either if you're going to revisit that plan, revisit it, modify it, and make it into the zoning law, make a commitment to do that so there isn't this confusion, or come up with a less specific, more general plan that then citizens won't point to and say, wait a second, this isn't following the specifics of that plan. I think it would make your life easier and the citizens' life easier.
Great. Thank you, Howard. Seth Weinberger, then Chuck Wasserberg, then Kira Kelly.
Hi, I'm Seth Weinberger, 649 Michigan, former chairman of the Evanston Zoning Board of Appeals. I just want to speak for a minute about both Albion and the Northlight project as it relates to the 2009 plan. First of all, there's been some confusion as to whether Albion meets the current zoning even before you talk about the 2009 plan. They're not entitled as of right to build anything close to the building they're proposing. They would need to make it shorter with a 40-foot setback from the street during the entire dimension of it, which would make it a completely non-viable project. The 2009 plan just makes it even more non-compliant. The 2009 plan said we want to bring down the height of that area to 38 feet, not the 105 that are even allowed in the zoning, forget the 185 that they're asking for. I echo Sarah's comments that we need to follow that plan. It is an elegant plan. It is a tremendous balance of trying to create more growth and more density and more height in Evanston, but preserve 4 streets that would be traditionally low retail, and both the Albion and the Northlight make it too high in those 2 of those 4 streets. I really believe that is an excellent plan to have Northlight in a tall building so that it can fund that plan. We need an art center in downtown Evanston, but it needs to be in core downtown where great height is allowed, not in one of the 4 precious areas. Or we need to rethink that one area perhaps as an arts district and really think about whether that's a good sacrifice of that one area to make it an arts district. But nothing should be allowed as a variance to what is allowed in any of those 4 districts without you folks either accepting the plan or modifying the plan. But you shouldn't just ignore the plan and just on a case-by-case basis put up extremely tall buildings that violate the core principles of the plan. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Seth. Chuck Wasserberg, Kira Kelly, then Carl Klein.
Hi there, I'm Chuck Wasserberg, 908 Greenwood. I have a statement to make about, or really a question in terms of what are we really building toward in Evanston. I have nothing against tall buildings necessarily, but I'm wondering what we're building toward here. I'm speaking specifically about the proposed Albion development on Sherman Avenue. I don't need to tell you or the folks who've just spoken about the Evanston plan, which everyone knows in great detail, but what I want to do is help us keep in mind the vision for Evanston, which I don't believe this building is a part of. Just a couple of passages from the plan really make this clear. The original plan calls for, and I'm quoting, a human scale that retains a strong pedestrian orientation and physical amenities. The potential parking problems alone fly in the face of this vision, with large amounts of automobile traffic siphoning through a narrow alley into and across pedestrian areas, which will likely choke off what traffic already passes by to begin with. There's also discussion of transition areas in the plan, which talks about building height limits being established to ensure reasonable, predictable limits on maximum building height. And then again, later on, building height limits are established to ensure reasonable, predictable limits to preserve the low-rise pedestrian shopping street character of designated traditional areas. So I think that's a vision that I would love for everybody to keep in mind as you go into your discussions. Finally, I would say that at a previous meeting, I heard one of the developers of the Albion building describe the building as, and I'm quoting him, a W-style construction, W Hotel style construction, which does not strike me as in keeping with the plan for Evanston. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. Kira Kelly, then Carl Klein, and then Barbara James will be the last speaker.
We, as part of Evanstonians for Responsible Planning, advocate that the council take the 2009 downtown plan into serious consideration when considering the upcoming Albion development vote, as well as other developments currently in the pipeline today. We also advocate that the city recognize and implement the public space elements of the plan, not only the development components, because right now we have this wonderful 2009 plan and the only thing that is happening is the tall building part. Here's an important part. If the council does not consider the 2009 plan when deciding on the Albion, then the plan has been undermined and should be discarded. Why? If the Albion is approved, and we are very hopeful it will not be, it will obliterate the South Traditional Zone and undermine the key tenet in the 2009 plan, which is an agreement to have some traditional human scale zones that balance the many core zones, which are very high development. Similarly, the 37-story Sherman Avenue development would obliterate the North Traditional Zone. Evanstonians are left only with the core zones, which are zoned even higher than today's zoning. That's not fair, it's not balanced, and it wasn't agreed to by all of the people that participate in this process. So we are calling for three things. First, a moratorium on development projects for any plan today not in the plan development pipeline. We are doing this because most of these are so far have been approved with extreme variances that have often undermined our zoning. And each developer, as Albion is doing, then uses past variances to get more variances, or in some other cases to push the boundaries of the zoning areas, as using that as a precedent to keep going. Today, I have to be honest, it seems like the Wild West of development in Evanston, and we must pause. Neither plans nor the current zoning is being followed. Here's an example. Why and how is a 37-story development even being proposed in an area legally zoned for maximum 7 stories? The developers must assume it will be approved. How was 831 Emerson given 100+% zoning variance on one of their elements, as was pointed out by Albion developers in their case to get more variances? Also, too, we must put a stop to planned developments, as was mentioned earlier. Perhaps the original intent was good to make sure there's very high standards and public benefits if we're going to have high rises, but it seems to only encourage and give developers a path to go bigger and gives a green light for, again, extreme variances that are, again, used as precedent for the next developer. 3, before the city makes any further decisions, city council, the mayor, and city manager must consider the will of the people as evidenced from the examples I'm going to mention that are overwhelmingly against the transformation of the city with these kind of mega developments that degrade livability and affordability. Read the comments the city asked residents of the community to make on the city's own website, the co-urbanized website for the Albion. Please read those. Of the 465 plus comments, most are heartfelt pleas for the city to stop the transformation of the city. Consider 2 petitions with 1,600 signers about 2 different high-rises on Sherman. And again, read the comments that reflect the same sentiment.
Kira, I need you to wrap up in 10
Finally,
seconds.
read the public sentiments of hundreds of residents that are summarized in the 2009 downtown plan, some of which were mentioned. Also, just aldermen should consider taking a cue from Chicago, where some aldermen have down-zoned areas like Milwaukee Avenue and Logan Square to protect from overdevelopment and protect from affordability issues and minority displacement.
Thank you,
Okay,
Kira.
thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have Carl Klein and then Barbara James. I've got Carl first and then Barbara. Yep. Sorry if I messed that up earlier, if I said Barbara, then Carl.
All right. Hello. Since most of the current city council was not around when there were discussions about the downtown plan, let me tell you about an important vote. And for Alderwomen Winnan and Rainey, let me refresh your memory. I did a little research and found the following information. On Monday, May 29, 2007, at the official regular meeting of the City Council, consideration to impose a moratorium on new construction in the downtown area was discussed. Alderman Tisdale moved to suspend the rules to adopt an ordinance at the same meeting at which it was introduced. The motion was seconded. Motion carried unanimously. Alderman Tisdale moved approval of Ordinance 51-0-07, moratorium on the new building construction in the downtown area. The motion was seconded. All aldermen voted aye during roll call. The motion carried 9-0. Let's have a moratorium on all development now while you review the downtown plan. It is within City Council's power to tell developers no, or at least that they adhere to the zoning that is in place. The moratorium will have no damaging effect on developers. Citizens have a voice in the plan that will affect all. Ordinances are not ends in themselves, but implement public policy which have respect to the downtown. High-rise mega developments currently proposed for the downtown threaten to use the planned unit developments exception in Title VI, the zoning code, to swallow the zoning rules, which together with the 2000 comprehensive plan and the 2009 downtown plan protect citizens, businesses, and residences. In 2015, the Illinois Appellate Court recognized the comprehensive plan of 2000 as formal authority in the city of Evanston, and that this plan treats the 2009 downtown plan as more than just a mere guideline. In contradiction to what Johanna Leonard's remarks to Alderman Fleming at the end of the last City Council meeting, please take notice of this and call for a moratorium on all planned developments in Evanston and respect the plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. All right, now your turn, Barbara. We're good? All right, thank you, Barbara, for passing on that. Okay, then seeing no more public comment, we will, okay, give me 1 second. We'll move to our special order of business, but before we do that, Alderman Ravel had something. Oh, okay. All right, so I'm going to turn to Alderman Ravel just to introduce the special order of business.
So are we having a staff presentation?
We are. Yep.
Okay.
I was going to let you call them up. Yep.
Okay, fine. Let's go for that then.
All right. Good evening, Johanna Leonard, Community Development Director. I just have a few slides to review some of the things that were discussed at the last council meeting. This is a slide that kind of summarizes what a downtown plan in planner speak. These are generally sub-area plans that are part of a larger plan, and you'll find a lot of communities will have a downtown plan we have a Central Street plan, West Side plan that address certain characteristics of a neighborhood or community area that need additional attention. This is a summary, and this was in the packet, of some of the history from the 2009 downtown plan. If some of you may recall, this started in the mid-2000s when there was some interest and concern over how the downtown was being developed and planned. So there was a group of I think there were some aldermen at the time, some plan commissioners, and some stakeholders that would meet, I believe, once a month to talk about downtown Evanston issues and the planning related to it. And then you see that in 2007, the principles for the downtown plan and the other work started, and then we moved into a long process of the Plan Commission reviewing the draft plan. And full disclosure, I was on the Plan Commission at that time. And then we moved in 2009 in February to the Plan Commission, the City Council adopting the downtown plan. This is a snapshot of the current downtown zoning. And then the next slide is the downtown proposed zoning changes that were incorporated into the downtown plan. So I'm happy to answer any questions about the plan. And Melissa Klotz, the city zoning planner, is here as well if there's issues or concerns about the current zoning that we can answer.
Terrific. Thank you, Johanna. Alderman Rainey?
Thanks, Johanna. Can you tell us, and I mean, you're younger and your brain is working better, what tall building projects were in the pipeline in 2009?
Well, the one that comes to mind was 708 Church.
Well, I know that one.
So
I'm talking about other ones.
Right. There had been, and I don't recall, I mean, I was not a staff member or a plan commissioner at that time, In my time on the Plan Commission, there were only 2 buildings that came through, and then the downtown plan, and that was 708 Church and the Amley development. So that was kind of pre-recession.
Right.
There was
So-
also the Winthrop Club, which was Evanston turned into something else.
That was, well, 1890 Maple was it was mentioned in the plan, but it never got built.
So I wanted to put some context to the idea of the moratorium. That wasn't a very threatening vote to developers at that time. Granted, there was the Church Street project, but I would like people to remember the economics of that period of time, especially real estate economics. It was a very bad period of time for real estate development. So I think a lot of developers might have actually appreciated the timeout. So I had no problem whatsoever voting for a moratorium. I would have an enormous problem right now voting for a moratorium. I think it would be financially horrible thing to do to people, and I would never vote for a moratorium on building projects right now.
Johanna, just for some of our edification up here, so it looks like the plan, based on that timeline that you had up, recommended approval of draft in October 2008, didn't get adopted until February 2009. So it was like a 4-month period. I was just curious why, and then also curious about why the plan wasn't codified, and maybe other people up on the stage can answer that too.
So the plan, are you saying the plan between
Well, I just see October 2000, it was approved. I'm just curious, like, was there some conversation that's going on that was important just for us to understand, and then it was February 2009 before it was adopted?
So what happened at the time was the plan was released in October. It was I remember this very, very vividly. It was in the Parasol Room. It was a joint meeting of the Plan Commission and the Economic Development Committee, and it was presented. And Alderman Nguyen was there, and I think probably Alderman Rainey was there as well. And it was there was the room was filled. It was standing room only, and it was released. And then it came to Plan Commission for discussions, and it could have been November, December, but those may have been times that the Plan Commission was still deliberating on 708 Church. I can't recall exactly. And then when the Plan Commission started their review, I recall some of the feedback from the people who came to provide public comment were very concerned that the consultants the city had hired had not provided a plan that reflected the comments that had been received during the public review period. And there was one resident who pointed out that a Google search had revealed some of the passages from the plan matched passages from other plans for other communities. So they felt like it had been a cookie cutter type plan. And so the decision at that point was that the Plan Commission would go through line by line to review the document. So that was January 2008 through October 2008. We met monthly to go over the plan, word by word.
Okay. But then that lag between October 2008 and February, I was just curious if there was, again, and maybe Alderman Nguyen or Rainey or Fisk, because I know, although Fisk, I don't know if Alderman Fisk, if you were on the council then, can sort of help understand or articulate why it wasn't codified and maybe what was going on at that time.
If I could just jump in, sure. Mr. Mayor, I don't remember this exactly, but if the community will remember that our budget cycle was different then, and we had a requirement that a budget be passed by February 28th of every year. And so the December, January, and February were intense budget discussions. And so you'd have to go back and look, but we only had one meeting in December. The budget was released. Then in January and February, we frequently met, probably 4 or 5 Saturdays. That that might explain why it wasn't taken up until later in February. I'll bet it passed at the second meeting in February.
What about the codification of the plan, like why it wasn't codified? And I know Alderman Wilson wants to say something, so I'll ask that question, and Alderman Nguyen, and then I'm going to go to Alderman Wilson, and then the next light that goes on.
I wonder why we stopped codifying it as well. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to go to Alderman Wilson, then Alderman Fisk.
Thanks. And, you know, there was an election in 2009. I think we had a number of new council members that joined the council, but those who were here and those new members recognized, I think, some of the extreme and very obvious incorrect assumptions in this plan. The plan predicted a very, very strong ongoing residential development, more condos, projected 35,000 square feet of additional commercial space. That's in addition to the 708 Tower building, in addition to the 1890 project, which was supposed to have a grocery store. So those two projects didn't happen. It was apparent that they weren't going to happen, and I think just operating on a basic recognition of what was reality in front of us, the market was not what the plan projected. It doesn't escape my attention that a lot of people talk about, you know, we should be following the plan. But I'm a little baffled by that because, for example, if we were to go back and say, okay, you know what, we need to have followed this plan. So what we need to do is we need to catch up on the projected 200 units of housing a year that didn't happen. So we're maybe 1,000 units down. So we should really, if we're going to follow this plan, we should be scrambling like crazy to add units because we're way behind. We're also 35,000 square feet in retail behind, according to the plan. And Johanna, could you go back to the alphabetized drawings or designations?
Sorry. This one?
Right. So, you know, I don't have a particularly strong interest to tear down Davis Street and fill that in with 8 to 10 story buildings. And since this plan was adopted, we also adopted the inclusionary housing ordinance, which the maximum with bonuses, the bonuses would be even higher at this point. So K has 88 feet, so that would probably be somewhere in the neighborhood of 9 to 10 stories. So Davis Street, those nice 2-3 story restaurants, businesses, could theoretically all be 8-story buildings. And you can go down the list. J, the central core, 35 plus stories. You know, which entire blocks of existing businesses and buildings are we going to choose to tear down to follow this plan? For the most part, and I realize that the Northlight is an exception to that, but the other proposals that are kind of on deck are taking either underutilized or empty space. So the Nevins property, the owner of that property is selling the property, so it's not like anybody's taken away the Nevins building. The Chase Bank property, again, it's a drive-through and an empty lot, so it's taking something that's not being utilized. The library parking lot is a parking lot presently. So to me, it makes sense to look at the empty space instead of tearing down or putting out other businesses and other residences. We talk about affordable housing, and this increases the supply. It's that Econ 101 class we took in high school. If we're going to go to find other places and tear down maybe some 2-3 story buildings that have apartments, those tend to be the market rate affordable units. So I'm not particularly interested in going around town and finding the older housing stock and tearing that down so we can put in more expensive units for a trade-off of 10% affordable units. So the plan, in my opinion, it wasn't codified, and I was on the council then, because it stopped reflecting the reality of what we were looking at. And it wasn't a close call. Properties were in foreclosure, buildings weren't getting built, and we were in a completely different environment, not to mention our budgetary issues. So this plan stopped making sense. I realized it was well-intended. I realized a lot of time and effort went into it. But it started in 2006, and by the time it actually got adopted, the reality had changed. So I had no interest in codifying this. I don't want to see Davis Street filled with 10-story buildings, and you know, the way we've been doing it with a thoughtful public process to evaluate the projects that have been before us, I think has been fairly effective. These projects have been very well vetted. They've evolved over time, and I think the ones that have been built ended up being a good, positive contribution to the community.
Okay. Thank you, Alderman Wilson. Alderman Fisk?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is, like almost everything that comes before us, this gets really complicated. And I understand the frustration of the public. We have a plan that a lot of them worked on. What's happening right now doesn't seem to reflect that plan, but I think Alderman Wilson explained it pretty well. I mean, looking at it, and I remember this was mainly considered before Don and I came on the council, so we came on in April of 2009, but we were also going through a campaign following 708 Church and opposing that, and we were at the same time having a change, I believe, with our zoning administrator. I think there were some changes going on in that office as well. And I think I couldn't support the heights that are in the 2009 downtown plan. I mean, I can't support the destruction of what I see as the 1700 block of Sherman Avenue, but I feel really strongly that, for example, the area in the 5th Ward that is now small-scale, affordable, single-family houses, many of which are being rented out, the North Downtown Plan envisioned perhaps replacing those houses with larger buildings to accommodate students and other people who wanted to live close to transit-oriented development. That goes contrary to what I think we should be doing, and that is creating affordable housing for families and other folks who want to live in a house and not necessarily in a large building. All of that, and I'm only one of 9 people on the council. I mean, I get to have an opinion, but my opinion has to mesh with my 8 colleagues here, and we need to discuss these things and bring them forward with the help of the public and work on this together. That's the other point that Ms. Lindwall brought up. I thought was really good, and I think people may not understand that planned developments really do offer the seller of the property a way to capitalize on their investment in the property. Obviously, if a larger building can be built under the planned development process, the seller of the property is going to benefit more. If a larger sales price for the real estate, rather than a smaller building that would not realize as much for the seller. And that's something that we have control over through zoning. And how we send that message is something that we're going to have to deal with. We're going to have to deal with it with affordable housing. We're going to have to deal with it with, again, with the buildings that come in and are not necessarily what we think represents the best design for our city. I fought really hard for the library parking lots building to be as beautiful and as low and as compatible as possible, and I see what we ended up there as a victory. Is that victory the same victory we're going to have in other parts of the downtown? I don't think so. But how we deal with that, do we scrap the planned development process? I'm not ready to do that. Well, no. I mean, do you want this? I don't think you want this. I think if we went to this and people started coming in and we codified this, you guys would be here and you would be objecting to it. I mean, I don't want, for example, in J, I don't want a 35-story building. I mean, then why didn't we build 708 Church? Why did we work so hard to defeat 708 Church? That wasn't 35 stories. So I think you have to be very careful what you ask for, and we need to do a better job of not only listening to you, but making the process clear enough and less confusing so that we're all working on this together and we end up with a vision and a built environment that really reflects the character of Evanston. And that is what I see we're giving up with some of these projects, is that we have folks coming in, they don't understand how these streets work, they don't understand the niche retail, the mom and pop retail that have stuck with us for years, when corporate retail, closed its doors at the end of the day if they didn't meet their numbers. We've got to take all of that into consideration because these are real lives here. And I don't feel comfortable going in the direction of just building higher, taller buildings in order to get more tax revenue or stuff like that. It's much, much, much more complicated than that. And I think this is a good thing to be doing tonight, is talking about it.
Thank you, Alderman Fisk. Alderman Rainey?
I'm not ready to talk about this.
Okay. Next up, Alderman Nguyen.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I have a lot of things to say, and I think having been on the council when we did adopt this plan, and I completely acknowledge that the world turned upside down with the Great Recession, and it is even continuing. We all know that retail is turning upside down again. So I understand 10 years later that if we hadn't had the Great Recession, this plan might still make some sense to some people. There are aspects of it that I still think that we all would share our view of. So, I mean, it also was written at a time when we had the pressure of the tower. And for those of you who don't remember, I voted over and over and over against the tower. So, the only silver lining to the recession was it stopped the tower. So, but the point of this downtown plan is exactly what I think Sarah read, which is piecemeal development is terrible. It is absolutely terrible. We should not be in a position where we are doing individual negotiations over every property. That's actually what caused us to try and come up with zoning that the community could count on, and frankly, that the development community could count on, so that people weren't coming in and girding for a long battle. We have done that a number of times in Evanston, much to the exhaustion of the community and the discouragement of positive development. And so the point was to draft a downtown plan that gave the community some sense of certainty about what would happen in their neighborhood, so they didn't have to be on high alert and know the zoning code forwards and backwards in order to get in here and fight over it, and that the development community could know that they should not even come forward with a 25-story building in a place that we have decided a 25-story building will never be built. So what developers, we hear this all the time, developers want certainty, and the community wants certainty too. That's why we've had battles when there have been surprises or when the zoning is up for grabs. I completely appreciate Jean Lindwall's point about planned unit developments. The reason why we put planned unit developments in place was because that's what our lawyers told us was the only way in which we could have some say over the quality of the building that was built. We'd had too many really cheap buildings built, and we all can think of them right away in the late 90s in Evanston. And the solution for that was by making everything a planned unit development, that we could say to the developer, the marvelous brick and the terrific glass that you showed us, you have to build that. That's a requirement now in the planned unit development. You can't show it to us and then tell us later when the building is built, oh, you know what, that was a suggestion. So, I'm not sure what the answer is here, except that now we have these developments. They're like stacked up like planes coming into O'Hare. And none of us, I'll say, I'm not happy about it, because zoning, and Evanston prides itself on being the first city in Illinois to have a zoning ordinance. And part of it is because it's a jigsaw puzzle, and we all agree that this will go here and that will go next to it, and you have some sense of what your community will look like. But if you change one of those pieces, it wrecks the jigsaw puzzle. So that's why we had a whole downtown planning process, because we recognized that there was pressure on our downtown to do things that we as a community didn't necessarily want to do. So there was a long process. Now, is this exactly what we should be doing now? I'm not entirely sure. I don't entirely agree, but I do know, I really, really think it's terrible for us to have a negotiation one by one by one, because we will lose. I mean, they will come in and cite, gradually we'll get pushed off what our vision is. And if developers think that having a planned unit development means they can go big, then we need to say, no, you can't. The purpose of a planned unit development was to have quality control over the building and give us more ability to say no to certain things. In my mind, and I was on the council when we adopted that, it didn't mean it was a free-for-all. That was never the understanding of what we were doing when we adopted the planned unit development. So, I'm puzzled. I think moratoriums, and I did vote for the one in 2007, moratoriums are difficult. They put the city at risk of liability. I see why communities do it, because they recognize that things are coming at them pell-mell, and they really need an opportunity to take a deep breath. I think we really have to come together as a community and figure out what we want for looking ahead for our downtown, recognizing also that these things might need to be revisited much more frequently than we might think in the past that they were, because, as we know, retail is changing so rapidly, and people's housing patterns are changing so rapidly. The traditional zones here were held on to because there was a recognition that those were the things that gave Evanston a sense of character. People have debated me lately about charm, using the word charm. I think we're charming. Other people don't, so I call it character and personality now. Davis Street, actually, that was downzoned, Alderman Wilson, from what it was originally in the downtown plan. Alderman Bernstein worked hard to make sure that K section was dropped down to 4 to 8 stories. Alderman Rainey might remember that. So I'm not sure where this leaves us. I think I thank Alderman Revelle for getting us going, talking about this, because we all needed to read this again and have the discussion about where do we go from here. But fundamentally, what I think is unfair to us as a community and unfair to, frankly, the good developers who might want to invest in our community, is to have it go piecemeal. We won't end up with a community that we all want to live in if we do that.
Thank you, Alderman Nguyen. Alderman Rainey? Oh, excuse me, Alderman Revelle.
Well, I thank the council for advancing this discussion of the downtown plan. It had been scheduled for the end of October, and I did want us to have an opportunity to reread or read for the first time, perhaps, the downtown plan before we start dealing with these planned developments that are, as Alderman Nguyen said, circling the airport and ready to land. I agree that we're in a quandary as to, I don't think any of us are totally happy, totally is even too strong a word, with the this zone, the way the zones are designated in this downtown plan. I think a lot of us would want to, I think the world, Evanston has changed a lot, and the world has changed a lot in the last almost 10 years since the process of planning had started. So what's envisioned there is not what we really want in many respects for the downtown. But nonetheless, the plan, I think, has a lot of really good planning concepts in it that will serve us well as we begin to evaluate the various plan development proposals coming to us. And I guess there were 4 concepts that struck me as I was reading the plan. And one is, I do think a taller, denser, mixed-use development in the downtown core that takes advantage of our public transit is is good policy, good planning policy. It's good environmental policy. It helps reduce climate pollution. It's good economic policy because it provides good support for our downtown business and retail community. So height bonus, a bonus is okay in the core area, but it really needs to be in exchange for significant public benefits. We have the phrase public benefits in a lot of our documents, but we really need to, I guess, have another discussion at another time about what those public benefits really should be in order to award the height bonuses. And then we need to really decide how much of a height bonus we're willing to, that we want to see in our downtown in the various areas. So that's a challenge. Secondly, we've heard a lot tonight about trying to maintain Evanston's unique local flavor, its character, et cetera, balancing the old and the new, and that is really important. And I think the plan does try to do that by identifying those traditional zones. And so we need to work hard, I think, to try to keep those. I think when people, we want our downtown to be something other than going out to Old Orchard. We want to have some of those special shops that give Evanston real character. I think we're all getting really anxious about Bookman's Alley. So I think that's a real challenge for us. The third thing is when I look at the downtown plan and I look at that map, it just like it's too many zones for me to get my head around. But there are three main ideas there. A core zone where, yes, height is going to be desirable. Traditional zones where we're going to try to maintain that local character that makes Evanston special. And then the transitional zones around the edge. And I think we need to take a really close look at some of those. I think some of the heights that were envisioned for particularly along Lake Street, I think is too tall. There's not a real good transition then to the residential areas to the south of that. And finally, oh yes, I suggest for our next assignment, homework assignment, is that we review the plan development design guidelines that are mentioned in this downtown plan. And I think some of the design guidelines are in the downtown plan. I'm thinking in particular of the upper story setback requirement. And so that means that your building steps back, and that helps mitigate the visual impact then if you're a pedestrian. And so it says in the downtown plan that all floors above the fourth floor must be set back a minimum of 10 feet from the building lines, so as you're walking along as a pedestrian, you don't feel like there's a looming tower above you. It also suggested that we count above grade parking floors when we're looking at the height of a building. That would have an important impact on some of the development proposals we're going to look at, and basically try to promote a more slender building profile in those buildings that are going to be taller. So those are some ideas that struck me as I was reading this and that I will be personally using as I evaluate the plan developments coming to us.
Thank you, Alderman Ravel. Alderman Fisk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted really briefly to say I see Annie Coakley sitting back there, and I think it would be helpful if Annie and our economic development staff got together and gave us a list of who the retail tenants are in the downtown. My sense of what's happening in the downtown is that while the larger tenants are and the new spaces that are at market rates are difficult to fill, we don't have quite so much problem filling the older, less expensive retail spaces and the Class B office space. The Class B office space includes our therapists, our architects, all those folks who don't want to pay the cost of going into a larger Class A. space, but want to be in the downtown. And I think, as I said in my previous remarks, I think those are the folks who stick with us over the long term. And while retail certainly is changing, and it will be interesting to see what happens with the Target store that I hope is very successful, I don't think we're ever going to have a problem with people wanting to run small businesses in the downtown. And I think we're uniquely prepared for that. And so I'd like that information if whenever we continue this discussion, which I hope is soon.
Thank you, Alderman Fisk. Is there any other discussion? Okay, all right. So seeing none, this was an item that was on our agenda for our discussion, and thank you to the public for coming up and offering your thoughts during public comment. I'm not seeing on here, but
We don't do call to the large usually, but there's an
no, but okay. So Alderman Wilson, could you lead us into executive session?
Thank you. Pursuant to 5 Illinois compiled statutes ILCS 120/2A, I move that the City Council convene into executive session to discuss agenda items regarding litigation. These agenda items are permitted subjects to be considered in executive session and are enumerated exceptions under the Open Meetings Act. These exceptions are 5 ILCS 120/2A and C11.
Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Is there a motion to adjourn? Oh, excuse me, to recess?
Yes.
Second? All in favor?
Just for clarity,
Okay.
Human Services will be after this
And
meeting.
then Human Services will be after, and I'm estimating 7:30, we figure? Excuse me, by 7 o'clock. This executive session should be quick. Thank you.